some Trump critics are also just muzzling themselves, fearing retribution in this semi-dysfunctional environment, a kind of chill spreading over political debate in Washington, the Times notes, with some intimidated by the prospect of being attacked online by Trump and Elon Musk, concerned about harm to their companies, frightened for the safety of their families. And again, we are talking about a government that has come back into power after a violent insurrection and on the first day pardoned people who used violence. So those online attacks can put targets on people's very literal backs and affect their families. And the history of violence, the support of violence, the pardoning of people who attacked police, that's all just in the background noise of how this stuff works now. But Donald Trump's FCC is calling for probes or beginning probes of top news outlets. And we can mention that includes our sister channel, NBC, as well as these other outlets, NPR and PBS, tied to government funding, where there might be more leverage if it is abused. Tech CEOs and media moguls who once criticized Trump have gotten the message, shown up at the inauguration, as we saw. Jeff Bezos there, turning the Washington Post into a totally different direction, pulling its endorsement plan for Harris, changing its opinion policy now to celebrate only personal liberties and free markets. These are drastic changes. First, your reaction to what I mentioned is the journalistic reporting about what happened in that cabinet room, and what does that tell us about how this new administration is functioning?
Well, as you pointed out, we need reporting like that. The New York Times did a great job with that story. I think we need revelatory reporting. I should say that the Washington Post itself is doing a lot of revelatory reporting as well, despite my complaints about the direction under Jeff Bezos most recently. Day in and day out, they're doing great work. But look, I mean, there's a lot to know about what's happening in this administration. The press has an absolute obligation to find that out and to reveal that to the American public and tell them what they need to know and what they deserve to know.
When you ran the Post, of course, your full-time focus is being a student of and learning about power. What do you see in the power dynamics in that room? And as I mentioned, what does it tell you that a sitting president about 7 weeks in then has to say, hey, the agency chiefs will run the agencies, not this billionaire?
Well, we saw a lot of this the first time around with Trump as well. It was sort of a chaotic administration. The people who were there had never worked with each other before. But now we see something different. Clearly, Musk has been given, at least up till this point, enormous power, far more power than the cabinet secretaries. And clearly, they thought they had an important job. They thought they had authority over their own agencies, and they quickly discovered that, in fact, they didn't have nearly as much authority, or if any authority, really, over their agencies.
Yeah, which is striking and certainly unusual. Whether that, according to government experts, is any kind of functional way to run it is sort of a results question. It's also certainly not what the Constitution imagines, because the cabinet secretaries, as you know, and I think viewers have seen, are subject to congressional oversight, going under oath, those hearings. But what does that matter if they're a stand-in, as you say, for someone else making the big decisions? There was an exchange about this with the president, Gabe Gutierrez, here today. Take a look.
Mr. President, since you last spoke about it yesterday, some details have come out about your cabinet meeting with Elon Musk and some clashes potentially between Secretary Rubio and Secretary Duffy.
No clash. I was there. You're just a troublemaker. And you're not supposed to be asking that question because we're talking about the World Cup. But Elon gets along great with Marco, and they're both doing a fantastic job. There is no clash.
But, Mr. President, bottom line,
who are you with?
NBC.
Oh, no wonder.
Mr. President, who has more authority, Elon Musk or your cabinet secretaries?
Any other questions?
What do you see there?
Well, it's part of a pattern. You've got a president who not only wants to dictate who asks him questions, but what questions are appropriate to even ask. That's a president who really does not respect an independent press, which is provided for in the Constitution of this country, who does not really respect free expression. Look, I mean, the job of the press is to ask the president questions in this instance. He is the most powerful person in the world. He has an enormous impact on the lives of ordinary people. And it's entirely appropriate for a reporter to be asking what happened in that meeting. And as is often the case, Trump merely denied the actual facts and claims that things are fake news when, in fact, we later learned that they're entirely true.
Yeah. Right, and you're kind of speaking about the baseline principle here because it's part of holding power to account, which brings us back to what I did promise we would get to, and I think I've reason to believe plenty of people are interested in your tenure. You wrote about it in The Atlantic. You worked under the Bezos leadership in a different era, and you were quite direct about what you think has gone wrong and the mistakes he's making now. Tell us what you think of what Jeff Bezos is doing now with that paper that you once ran.
Well, I've been very concerned about the direction of late, starting actually just prior to the election last year. He made the decision not to run a presidential endorsement for the first time. It had been a tradition for almost 50 years at the Washington Post. There was only one exception when they didn't provide a presidential endorsement. That was announced only 11 days before the election. I said then that I thought it represented cowardice. It was a sign of fear about reprisals on the part of Donald Trump. Donald Trump had said for a long period of time during the campaign that he was going to seek vengeance, retribution against his political enemies. And I think that Jeff Bezos feared that kind of retribution against his other commercial interests, particularly Amazon with its cloud computing services, and Blue Origin, which is in the commercial space area, competing with, of all people, Elon Musk. Subsequent to that, Amazon made a $1 million donation to the inauguration. He then made a pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago to have a late-night dinner with Donald Trump. During that dinner, he had a long discussion with, or some sort of discussion with Melania Trump about this so-called documentary that she was planning to have made about her life. And shortly after that, within 2 weeks, Amazon made an offer for that so-called documentary of $40 million, which was about almost 3 times the next highest bid, which was really extraordinary. And then, of course, Jeff Bezos appeared on the dais during the inauguration, shortly after talking about the lack of a presidential endorsement, saying all of us need to work harder to establish our credibility. Well, that did nothing for the credibility of the Washington Post, and it certainly did not signal the independence of the Washington Post. It signaled the dependence of the Washington Post. And then most recently, he's indicated that the opinion pages, the opinion section in print and online, would reflect his own ideology. His ideology of how he described it was personal liberties and free markets, without actually explaining exactly what he was talking about there. I don't know anybody in the opinion section who was opposed to personal liberties, but apparently he thinks so. So I'm very concerned about that direction. I should say again that I don't see how that it has affected the news coverage at all. The news coverage has been really excellent day after day. I know that on your network, you've featured a lot of Washington Post reporters, sure, and appropriately so. They've done a lot of they've exposed a lot of what's happening in this administration and its early weeks.
You've described a series of facts that relate to Jeff Bezos' conduct. Do you view him approaching the Washington Post now in a manner that is corrupt?
I'm not going to use that. I wouldn't use that word. I think it's inappropriate is the word that I would use. I think it's deeply unhelpful and inappropriate. Look, the Washington Post has a history of independence.
Let me try one other way, Marty, because, we both do this, right? Except you've done it at a very high level for a lot longer than me, so I'm not making comparisons. But let me ask the journalistic question one other way. Are you concerned that Bezos wants the newspaper to be used for his other business or personal goals? That is, something in competition or conflict with the paper simply doing the work it's supposed to do?
I think he wants himself to stay out of the crosshairs of Donald Trump. He doesn't want Donald Trump to go about canceling contracts or denying contracts to Amazon cloud computing services business. He wants to take advantage of the fact that Blue Origin just successfully launched a rocket into orbit and can now compete with SpaceX. He doesn't want that to be obstructed. So I think he's trying to navigate this situation and make sure that Donald Trump does not seek vengeance on him by engaging in activities that would hurt the business of his other commercial interests.